The year 1919, when the world believed that war had ended forever, but in reality it was merely the silence before a terrible storm. A document called the Treaty of Versailles had drawn a dark line across the fate of an entire nation. Germany was punished for a crime it had not committed alone, and Article 231 humiliated it before the entire world. Imagine a moment when the price of a single piece of bread in Germany reached 200 billion marks. People were dying of hunger, unemployment was at its peak, and from this very darkness emerged a man who fanned the flames of revenge. Adolf Hitler promised the people that he would make Germany great again, but no one had imagined that the price of this promise would be over 60 million lives. Hitler slowly strangled democracy and declared himself the Führer, the supreme leader. He wove such a web of betrayal and conspiracy that the terms of the Treaty of Versailles began breaking one by one. Germany secretly built its army, constructed new tanks, and raised a deadly air force called the Luftwaffe. When other European powers like Britain and France could have stopped him, they instead adopted a policy of appeasement. They believed that by offering Hitler a little land, war could be avoided, but this illusion was soon to be shattered. Hitler swallowed Austria and Czechoslovakia without firing a single bullet. The real explosion came in August 1939, when two bitter enemies, Hitler and Stalin, joined hands with each other. The world was stunned because the true purpose of this non-aggression pact was to divide Poland between themselves. On the morning of September 1st, 1939, German tanks broke through Poland's borders and the world witnessed Blitzkrieg, lightning-speed warfare for the very first time. Poland had no answer to this new style of war, where tanks and planes attacked simultaneously. Britain and France were compelled to declare war against Germany, but for many months no real fighting took place, a period that came to be known as the Phony War. But as spring of 1940 arrived, Hitler changed the map of Europe forever. Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and the Netherlands fell one after another. France, sitting comfortably behind the strong walls of its Maginot Line, was caught off guard when German forces came charging through the dense forests of the Ardennes. French generals couldn't comprehend what had happened to them, and within just a few weeks, the swastika flag was flying over Paris. Over 300,000 Allied soldiers trapped on the beaches of Dunkirk were saved only by a miracle when thousands of small and large vessels evacuated them across the sea. Now Britain stood alone, and Hitler had his eyes set on it. During the Blitz, London was bombed day and night, but Winston Churchill and his Royal Air Force refused to surrender. When Hitler failed to bring Britain to its knees, he made the greatest mistake of his life. He invaded the Soviet Union, an operation called Operation Barbarossa. Over 3 million German soldiers set foot on Russian soil, but they did not know that Russia's merciless winter was waiting for them. Even after reaching the outskirts of Moscow, the German army began to crumble under the weight of cold and disease. Meanwhile, in another corner of the world, another power was awakening. Japan, which sought to rule all of Asia, launched a surprise attack on America's Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Their intent was to break America's spirit, but this attack instead woke a sleeping lion. America entered the war, and the entire equation of the world changed. Japan suffered such a decisive defeat at the naval battle of Midway that its power began to collapse. The years 1942 and 1943 were the turning point of the war. In months of bloody street fighting in Stalingrad, the German Sixth Army surrendered for the very first time. Meanwhile, in the heat of North Africa, Even Erwin Rommel, known as the Desert Fox, was forced to retreat at El Alamein. Italy's dictator Mussolini fell from power, and Allied forces began entering through the soft underbelly of Europe. Now the time had come for Operation Overlord, D-Day. On that misty morning of June 6, 1944, over 7,000 ships arrived on the shores of Normandy. It was the largest seaborne invasion in human history. American soldiers on Omaha Beach faced a rain of death, but they never looked back. Under the leadership of Eisenhower, Allied forces began liberating France, and the streets of Paris once again rang with the Marseillaise. But Hitler still refused to accept defeat. He made one last attempt in the Ardennes, known as the Battle of the Bulge, but he had neither fuel left nor the will to fight on. From the east, the Soviet Red Army was advancing towards Berlin, taking revenge with every step. As the city of Berlin was reduced to rubble in the Battle of Berlin, Hitler took his own life in his bunker on April 30th, 1945. On May 8th, the war in Europe was over, but the fire in the Pacific still burned. Japan's soldiers were still fighting with harakiri spirit and kamikaze attacks, and America feared that invading Japan would cost millions of their soldiers' lives. Then a power was unleashed that changed the world forever: the atomic bomb. The two bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki reduced those cities to ash in minutes. On September 2nd, 1945, Japan surrendered, and the most terrifying chapter in history came to a close. When the smoke finally cleared, the world emerged in a new form. Old powers like Britain and France were weakened, and America and the Soviet Union rose as two new superpowers. The United Nations was founded so that such a war would never happen again. The Nuremberg trials sentenced those who carried out the mass murder of millions of innocents in the name of the Holocaust. But the price of this peace was enormous. This war reminds us of how far hatred and greed can go. Today's world is built from the very ashes that remained in 1945, and it is upon us not to repeat those same mistakes. This lesson must never be forgotten, because in war, no matter who wins, it is always humanity that loses.